infrastructure is something that's a very well-known concept terrestrially. It's something on which the entire terrestrial economy relies. Think roads, trains, electricity. The internet is a form of infrastructure. But traditionally in space, we haven't had much of that, right? If we think of what is supporting the spacecraft that are our moneymakers, it's launch infrastructure on the ground, it's ground station infrastructure for communications for backhaul, and then maybe it's in-space relay spacecraft, which has been fairly limited to date. So we don't have a whole lot of that. That's starting to change with a couple of the players we have on stage, some of the others who are in attendance at the conference, so it's exciting to dive into that. And so I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves and then speak a little bit so that we can get a introductory flavor to what we mean by this new world of in-space infrastructure we're coming to. What are the elements that you see as being important to a vibrant, reliable infrastructure system in space? So, Melissa, you're in the middle. I'm going to start with you.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn. I am absolutely thrilled to be on this panel with my colleagues. I'm Dr. Melissa Sampson with OrbitFab. OrbitFab is a US-based company, and we are working on refueling satellites. And so this opens up both propellant supply chains and enables the orbital infrastructure. So to your question, Carolyn, by being able to refuel satellites, that means that they're no longer disposable. It increases mission lifetime. It increases the availability of various types of missions. And it enables in-space servicing and other logistics. So once you have your assets in space, then you can continue to use them, and also other items such as servicers, which I'm sure my colleagues will speak about, that you have a ready supply of fuel and mobility on orbit waiting for the customers.
Thanks. So, Etienne, you are indeed that servicing player that Melissa alluded to. So can we hear your thoughts?
Yes, indeed. So, does it work? Thank you very much. So we at Infinite Orbits are designing and building services called spacecraft. So our services are meant for geo orbit. We are currently providing in-orbit servicing for life extension, but also SSA and space surveillance. So we are actually have two satellite branches which are called Endurance for life extension and Orbit Guard for in-space surveillance. And we got pretty the same ideas as Orbit Head in the way that for the operators, for us, life extensions is like a new alternative for them to use their asset at the end of life. But I think that maybe we don't have the same schedule regarding the life extension and refueling, as for the moment the operators' assets are are not equipped with the refueling part. So, thank you.
Thank you. And then Lindsey, you're our non-operator on the panel, so please share a little bit about yourself and your thoughts on that.
Hi, I'm Lindsey. I work for Starbridge Venture Capital, and we invest in early stage, kind of more dual use type space and defense technologies to help enable future space infrastructure. And the way we see it is we're trying to help build up the bits and pieces in space, but then we also want to make money terrestrially.
It's always good to have that make money terrestrial. I think most people in the room are fans of doing that sort of activity. So, to that point of how much money we can make, how much demand is there? This is a new type of capability. It's something operators haven't used before. Is there robust demand, and sort of what is the balance between demand signals from the market? We've seen that from some players. US Space Force specifically has talked about refueling. They really want it, versus a lack of demand signals, but a build it and they will come idea that you think this is such a valuable capability that inherently it will generate business once it's available.
So basically, for the demand, we think that life extension or either refueling is quite the right moment for the operators. When we look at the current market, operators need to reduce the cost of the leasing, the price for the leasing capacity of their satellite, and in the same time, the cost of brand new satellites stay the same. So in-orbit servicing is also a new way to offer operators alternatives for their investment strategy, as this could be a new opportunity to do not have to buy brand new satellites.
Melissa, your thoughts?
Sure. Building on that, the infrastructure, in-space servicing, refueling, I would call it an emerging market currently. There are some demand signals from various governments across the globe. There are some commercial signals as well. I will say for the refueling technology, one of the challenges is that the satellite, it has to be built into the satellite on the ground. Right now, simple refueling in orbit doesn't exist. There are other companies that offer jetpacks or permanent propellant extensions, but in order to actually be able to refuel a satellite or another asset, simply replacing your fill and drain valve on Earth actually makes the satellite fully available in the ability to be refueled at any time in orbit. But that being said, for the commercial operators, there also has to be a demand to make that change to the engineering. So while the non-recurring engineering is low, it's certainly not zero.
So first, quickly, we do have a poll question on the screen. So if you guys want to log into Slido and fill that out, I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts on that by the end of the session. To follow up on that point, Melissa, it's an interesting dynamic that operators will have to change how they design and build spacecraft to be able to use your technology. Etienne, is that the same for infinite orbits?
Yeah, I think that the main difference between in-orbit refueling and life extension, the way we do at infinite orbits, is that this is the real difference between operators needing to change the design and the operator that can currently use the life extension, because in fact, the life extension, the way we do it as infinite orbits, is really simple, as we use a robotic arm to grip the launch adapter ring of the current satellites. So this is definitely the difference between the demand that we can have between the refueling capacity and the life extension, where our market right now is for the actual satellites in orbit, where I think your market will be a new brand, the new type of satellites with refueling capacity.
So the changing of the design potentially is one element of having to adjust the business model. You mentioned there's some NRE that could be involved in that. What are other ways that operators might have to think differently about their business models if they want to use servicing, logistics, infrastructure capability? What are the ways in which they might change thinking about the lifetime of their spacecraft or their replacement cost or how they're refreshing technology? What are the other elements that you think will drive change, or that will be required in terms of changing the business case for these operators than what we've been doing for 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah, indeed, I think that the in-orbit servicing is not really a way that the operator need to change the way they do business. I think it's more about adding new alternative about what they can do. For the moment, the current business was buying a satellite, launching in orbit, and then waiting it to die. Then with life extension or in-orbit refueling, the operators can then extend the life of their asset. They will be able to refuel it. So it means it offers them like new business possibilities regarding the satellites and regarding the customers.
Yes, and to build on that, with the opportunity and the ability for infrastructure and logistics in space, there are actually multiple ways that satellite operators and manufacturers can change their satellites. This could lead to smaller fuel tanks. This means that satellites could be launched with 10% of their fuel, which drives down your launch mass and your launch volume. It opens opens up a whole aperture of secondary missions in addition to the primary mission. So I think, Carolyn, you had asked about other opportunities. And so if you didn't have to consider how much fuel you had and how that was directly affecting your satellite, it also frees up people resources. At many of the operators, particularly on the US government side, there are people whose job is to figure out how much and how far can a satellite move based on the fuel, and how does that affect its lifetime. When you remove that variable or free up that constraint, suddenly there's a whole opportunity of additional mission operations, and I think there will be a huge amount of creativity from the operators when we remove some of the constraints, not only on launch and getting our assets into space, but also what we can all do together once we're there.
Yeah, thanks for adding that point. I think especially on the last point of flexibility is really helping us, as it's harder for us to anticipate where the market is going to be in the next 5 or 10 years compared to 20 years ago we could build out a business model for a 15-year asset. Now logistics can provide the flexibility to do responsive operations in space so that if the customers change, you can move to where they are. Okay, Lindsey, we haven't forgot about you. We have 2 other speakers on the stage who are both part of startups. Many of the companies, though not all, we certainly have some established primes who are active in the infrastructure space, but many of them are startups. So when you start to think about this as an investor, if you say have companies coming to you that are operators that are also startups, do you have any hesitancy, or what are your thoughts about investing into a world where startups depend on startups depend on startups?
Yes, we definitely see that a lot, where it's kind of like a closed loop circle of everybody saying, oh yes, we have this customer, but then the customer is also a customer of a customer, and just keeps going on and on. So that is definitely a huge risk factor. But so when we look at startups in the early stage, it's really getting to know the founders, because you don't know how everything is going to play out in the long run. But if you know the startup founders and you have a really good relationship with them, and you're constantly in communication with them, and they know that if they have any issues, then they can come to you and we will help them as much as we can, then that's the foundation of a good relationship going forward in the startup, investing in these startups. But the way we also look at it is one of our first startup investments was Axiom Space, which is taking over from the International Space Station. And we invested in them like 10 years ago, which sounded crazy. But at the time, there were about only 2 startups working on this. And we knew that the International Space Station was going to be decommissioned around late 2020s, 2030. So this was something important for us in the space industry to make sure it continues forward seamlessly. So these are all sort of factors. But then also, I had a relationship with the founding Axiom team, so that's how we knew about them early on.
So one element, as you just said, is relationship with the founder and believing in the founder's capability to pivot potentially as needed. Curious, what are the elements that for you, when you're investing into a market that isn't proven? I mean, of course, venture is always investing into something risky. That's inherent in your model. But with space, some of these commercial models don't have a corollary, don't necessarily have something that you can look to and say, well, someone similar was successful, so they'll be successful too. What are the other factors that come into play as you make those decisions? And I mean, one of the other early investments that you guys made that definitely panned out, made in space, right? They had a successful exit. What are the other things you think about, especially for these infrastructure plays where there's not that sample version to look towards?
Yeah, so as I had said before, it's building the relationship with the founders, but then also if the founders have had previous startups that were successful, then that's also a huge factor. You mentioned Made in Space, so we had a good relationship with like Jason Dunn, who recently started Outpost. So we also invested in them early because we saw that as a helpful for our portfolio, as we have Axiom, which is a space station, and then they're trying to do a lot more manufacturing in there, and then Outpost needs to bring that back down to Earth. So these all kind of play in the same row. And then Made in Space, they also had robotics, and then we also recently invested in a humanoid robotics company called 1X, because we think that robotics is another really important factor in the future of the space industry and helping with manufacturing up there.
Yeah, robotics is certainly going to be critical for pretty much any infrastructure play. So just quickly, if you had to pick one as more important than the other, is it relationship with the founder and past experience of the founder, or is it the market that the company is in that is more important to you making a decision?
Early on, like early on? That's a hard one, but I think it's both. I mean, the relationship with the founder, so we know them, but then we also have to do our own sort of market research just to verify that what the founder is trying to do actually makes sense to us and will make money.
Yeah. Love that theme. So do commercial models, when we look at in-space infrastructure, it is easy to compare it in some ways to what we have on the Earth. That's how I started this panel. Infrastructure is something we all understand. But do the commercial models for how you make money, how you work with customers, how you plan out the CapEx of your infrastructure, do you think that's different in space than it is for terrestrial infrastructure companies, like, say, your local power company or the local water company that you pay in your home?
I'll start. So, it's a pretty difficult question to answer because, as in-orbit servicing is an emerging market, it's always difficult to compare this to something. But I think that the good thing about in-orbit servicing is that we can commercialize it in many different ways as a service. In fact, if I had to do a comparison, I would not maybe compare it to the local electricity company, but more like to the software company who can either sell a software or sell it as the software as a service. I mean, this is the good thing about servicing and service in every model is that it offers what we said earlier. It offers a lot of flexibility to the customers. So we can either compare it maybe to the software area and either compare it to the maybe a more local electricity company.
So in the markets that I've seen, I don't think space is particularly different. It's interesting because in the other domains of air, land, and sea, refueling, logistics, infrastructure, it all exists today for a variety of items, whether it's airplanes or ships or your cargo lanes, both for land and sea. So I do believe that it is not necessarily different in space. We all know that space is difficult inherently, but building up the infrastructure and having the logistics and having not only your gas stations, but also your robotics and your space stations there, the infrastructure will probably look somewhat similar to what we have on Earth.
And what will it take to, get these capabilities off the ground? Both of you certainly have venture capital, so some of it is from there. But, where does funding need to come from to really make this successful? I mean, Lindsey, are you going to pay for all these companies to launch their infrastructure?
I wish.
What are the other components that are important?
So I think it's important not to put all your eggs in one basket. So government funding is also a great way to get this early money that's debt-free and you don't lose any equity. However, you also have to be mindful that the government isn't always the most reliable source, so you don't necessarily know when or if the money is actually going to be coming. So that's one. And then also looking at debt financing. And then also you've got the ventures funds. So just be mindful not to rely on any one source of funding at any particular time.
So are both of your companies, Etienne and Melissa, looking at those three forms of financing in terms of getting your first capabilities on orbit?
So, yes, absolutely. It's all of those pillars, not only with venture capital, but also whether it's government, whether U.S. and across the world, and then as well as the commercial operators and driving revenue for the commercial operators as they are creating their satellites and launching them.
Well, indeed, this is a really good question because I think that at Infinite Orbit we are a bit different from the startups that are raising funds like we can do. Basically, at Infinite Orbit, we based our development on commercial revenues. This year, we signed our first commercial life extension mission, but between the 2017 and 2023, we based our development mainly on the commercial revenue that we can have with BIU. And then it's only this year that we have been granted by the French government, which allows us to accelerate our development, and we also closed 12 million funding. So.
Nonetheless, a mix. Okay, so we have one audience question. How much would it cost to refuel my satellite in orbit? So the benchmark a couple years ago, actually, Orbit Fab did put out a price, which, for our industry, we're a bit hesitant to talk pricing, and you guys said $20 million for 100 kilos. Is that still the price?
Yes, that is still the price. That is for hydrazine. So right now, the initial opportunity is with hydrazine for that pricing. But I will say we are compatible with other propellants, and we also are compatible with electric propellants as well. So that is the answer.
Okay, we have another audience question, interesting here, about what is the comparison, essentially, between shorter lifetime satellites that would be a lower cost. So say you have a satellite that can last for less than the legacy 15 years. Are customers pursuing that sort of model where you intentionally only plan your satellite to last, say, 7 years? Is that counter to the future of mission extension? Is that who you're competing with? Is manufacturers providing a 7-year satellite? Etienne, since you're doing life extension, let me throw that to you.
I think that I don't fully understood the question.
I guess the question is around, is life extension really only relevant for satellites that need to last longer? Or if an operator already says, I get enough money after 7 years, it's not worth it for me to extend the life of it. Is that what you're competing against, is when it's so cheap it doesn't make sense?
Well, I mean, the idea of life extension is that life extension is also the capacity to correct the inclination of a satellite or to relocate a satellite. So we can see it also as a good opportunity for maybe a lower lifespan satellite as for example, for our platform, we are platform agnostic, so it can mean we can extend the life of every satellite, and basically it means that it really depends on the operator business case. If they have like a customer that has a really interest to keep a satellite in a certain orbital slot, then definitely yes, it's a good thing to do.
If you want to jump in on that, you can. Otherwise, I have another question that I want to touch on.
Sure. I'll just add briefly, as I suspect we're coming up on the end of our time, but adding briefly, I think it's complementary. Logistics and refueling, it's not going to be one size fits all. In some ways, refueling might be an emergency solution. So let's say that your satellite is dropped off in the wrong orbit, and it's not where it needs to be, and you use up 30% of your allotted fuel to get in the right orbit to generate revenue. I also think that for shorter lifetime satellites, it's always a business decision on what the cost is to replace and launch that satellite versus utilizing the asset that's already on orbit.
Do we have answers to the poll that we could have a glance at? Okay, so either yes or undecided. I'm glad that not as many have not considered it, so you are thinking about it and potentially open to it. So it sounds like you guys have some business development to do this week to convince those undecideds to yeses. I want to make sure that we touch on the regionality question. You know, we are here in Asia Pacific. Some of you, so Etienne, you're based here, you're active in this area. You know, is there enough business that we can have national or regional ecosystems and capabilities for infrastructure where there's multiple, you know, players that all work together, but it is that more national, regional? Or is there not enough business and we need to have really a global capability? Sort of, where do you see the balance, especially given that all of these technologies are inherently dual use, between having national capabilities versus global?
Well, I think because we're for Infinite Orbits, our market is the geo market. As there are only around 60 geo operators, indeed our market is global and we stay international. We want to sell our capacity and services everywhere in the world. So basically, we need to be, as the geo market is still international, we have to be international too.
Melissa?
Sure. I believe that it's both. It can be a global international capability, but it also can be regional and sovereign. For example, you could have a fuel depot that is open to everyone and servicing is provided to everyone. You could also have a sovereign capability that is specific to a nation and its allies.
And Lindsey, would you invest in a company that's only going after a national market or only global?
Ooh, ideally global, but we want our companies to do as well as possible.
Okay. Thank you so much, Andy. I will pass it back over to you, and thank you to our panelists for joining us today.